some portions of the report. And then after the webinar is done, those of you who have joined us will get a copy of the full report. And next week, there'll be the recording of this portion of it and everything will be available. But there's an entire section in the trend report called Take on Trends, which is all benchmarking data from our proprietary database based on our, large client count, where we talk about plan costs and plan design and benefit options and offerings and those kind of things. So we hope you'll take an opportunity to read through the report once you get it. It's not light reading, but it is very informative. Today, we're joined by several of our industry thought leaders. So if all of those thought leaders could pop their video back on while we do some introductions, that would be great. Since we have limited time today, we're going to move through this overview fairly quickly in kind of a Q&A type of format. But we encourage you to ask questions. If you'll ask your questions through the Q&A portion of, at the bottom of your screen, you have Q&A. If you'll ask your questions through that, we'll gather the questions. We're not going to respond to questions because, again, we've got a lot of material to cover in a pretty short period, but we'll gather the questions. We'll prepare an FAQ that we'll post to the website where we keep the trend report next week. And then all of your questions will be answered there. And I'm sure if you're a current NFP client, your team members will also be providing you with that FAQ. So let me briefly introduce the team. So today we have with us Deb Smolinski. Deb is our head of well-being and engagement. So at NFP, we have national practice leaders who specialize in, certain categories. And Deb is our well-being and engagement leader. And for those of you, again, who are NFP clients, you've seen quite a bit from Deb, over the course of the year on mental well-being. It's a huge focus for us. You've also got Kim Heald. Kim Heald is our national practice leader on the voluntary benefits side of the house. We have Mark Ryder. Mark Ryder is our head of innovation. He'll be the coolest guy here dressed today. So, red tennis shoes and all, I'm sure. But Mark is our head of innovation, and you'll hear from him on digital transformation. We have Chase Cannon, who is one of our benefits compliance leaders. He's a senior vice president in benefits compliance, and he's also our deputy chief compliance officer. So he tries to keep all of us crazy characters in line, and definitely he and his team work hard to keep you all educated. We have Dr. Mark Tomasulo, who is our medical director, and we have Nellie Rose, who is one of our clinical pharmacists. And, for those clients who are familiar with NFP, you see quite a bit of thought leadership coming from Nellie. So it's wonderful to have her with us today. So we're going to start with Deb, and we're going to, as I mentioned, go through kind of just some discussion on high-level portions of the trend report, or, even trends that we've seen since we, created the trend report. So Deb, we certainly speak a great deal about mental well-being, and I mean, as you can, Daniel Pink's even touching on it. It's just now such a part, of our life, and it's a significant focus for us this year as we deal with trying to get clients better equipped to deal with the challenges just overall of the past year. But mental well-being is just a huge part of that. And I think Daniel's comments around gratitude, go hand in hand with mental well-being, and I know they really resonate with you. So let's start with the basics. We know mental health is at the top of the employer's list given these challenging and uncertain times. But how is mental health different from mental well-being, and how should employers strategically make that distinction?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like you said, Daniel kind of set us up perfectly, right? So we are doubling down on the difference between mental health and mental well-being, and you'll see that in the trend report because there is a very clear distinction. And right now, I think we're using it as this catch-all umbrella phrase, but it's really important to differentiate. So mental health really is based on that clinical focus. So when we say we need a mental health solution, it's really all about that clinical care. Do I have access to that care? Is it quality of that care? Can I get to them within a day or two versus weeks? And is it affordable? because it deals with the mental illness and the mental disease states versus like physical well-being to physical disease states. Mental well-being is more preventive in nature. It's your daily state of your mental and emotional health, basically. So in contrast, I love how Daniel said it's opposite, right? So mental health is clinical, and then mental well-being is really around your daily state. It's around basically how optimized is your brain every day. And we deal with that based on mental fitness. So mental health being clinical, we know by the research, really impacts and affects and supports 20 to 30% of a given population in the employer base. And it's critical. So everybody needs to really make those robust solutions and put them in place. But it's not enough because 100% of us, as we've discussed, are going through daily challenges, loneliness, grief, sadness, depression, anxiety on a daily basis, in and out of those emotions. And we really need to help employees now build the skills through mental fitness training to really, reprogram and rewire our brains to be resilient, to have a growth mindset, and to emerge stronger in this pandemic. So the good news about that, like I said, in mental well-being is it impacts 100% of us because we all have the same kind of brain. It's built the same way. It's to keep us safe, not necessarily happy. But also, when you do those initiatives like mental fitness training, it can impact every single employee's life, right? It's not the 20 to 30%, it's 100%, which is why we're doubling down. And you'll hear us really emphasize solutions around mental fitness training. So how do you make that distinction? I think was the second part of your question, right? It's really important, I guess, to first, as a leader, understand there is a clear difference. Mental health are clinical in nature. Mental well-being is the skill sets your employees can access and use and harness. So doing a needs and a gap assessment on each of those pillars is the first step. From there, then, it's then filling those in with the right solutions by working holistically throughout your entire HR department. And then also making sure that it's communicated in terms of not how, but the why, back to what Daniel said, right? Why is this important to know the difference? And why is it important to reprogram our brain? So those are kind of the distinctions I would start with.
Okay. Good. I mean, I think that's great. And I know we've put together, a mental health fitness center and I mean, all of those kinds of things. So, for any clients on the line, if those are things that you don't know where to access them, just let your advisor know. So Deb, what is another key well-being initiative that will be critical for employers to focus on to help their employees enter and emerge in this new phase of work?
Well, honestly, I think we're all in that quadrant of burnout, like Daniel mentioned, in some way, shape, or form. So just throwing on new solutions is not going to help. I would really hone in on distinguishing and elevating both mental health and mental well-being. But I guess my second recommendation would be to build that scaffolding. I call it a digital front door. So intranets are not the answer anymore. They're hard to use. They're not simple, as Daniel alluded to, and they're not easy to access. So it seems very hard. So our well-being, we want to increase it through all the resources we have and offer to employees. And we want to de-stress them when they access that. We want to make sure they know how to use it, when to use it, and how to find it. So like we built People EQ to build that scaffolding. And what we've learned from that is to make sure you can access every single benefit that you've put in that benefit guide on your phone, and it's app to app. So that would be my suggestion right now for those that are listening is go through your benefit guide and can you pull out your phone and find that travel assistance embedded into your LTD or life plan that comes free. It's important, but we don't know it. So doing that and then taking it a step further and saying, can they get to everything they need? Do they know where to go if they have COVID symptoms? Is it app to app in one digital front door to all of their resources? That in turn shows that we care as an employer to our employees every day when they pull out their phone and see everything we do and offer them. In addition, it de-stresses us and it helps employees elevate all aspects of their life. So the digital front door would be my second suggestion.
That's great. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Deb. And we're gonna move now into voluntary benefits. And as we think about employees' need for autonomy and self-direction and scaffolding and all of those, that's a new word for me in the benefits world. Um, you know, it seems voluntary benefits seems like the right fit into letting them kind of choose their own adventure. But Daniel's words resonate in my mind, not making it too complicated. Sometimes, simple is better. So, and in addition to that, I think, as in probably everything we're going to talk about today, COVID had an impact. I think it really brought to light that, our employee populations were not as financially secure as they needed to be, those kind of things. So welcome, Kim Heald. So what are the new trends in voluntary benefits? What are you seeing out there?
Well, first of all, I want to say I felt like Daniel, he must be listening to my conversations, right? Because he hit on, decision support, scaffolding, like curating a good program that makes sense, that hits kind of a multi-generational workforce, right? So I think before we get into the trends, we have to set the table first and talk about what you just alluded to, in that voluntary benefits have come a long way, right? So, and if we look at employees as they exist today, as Americans, we're terrible at saving, right? I mean, I think you can't not talk to Kim Heald and not hear that 60% of Americans don't have $1,000 in savings. And that's all well and good until you start looking at what's happening in our healthcare, our medical plans, and you take a look and you say, oh my gosh, over the last 10 years, we've seen 110% increase to deductibles, right? So in very short order, you see that if Americans don't have savings, but their employer-sponsored healthcare is getting less and less rich, we have to look at voluntary benefits with a more strategic lens. And so what I would say is that really over the last few years, because there have been this shift in medical plans, this movement to high deductible health plans, this movement to CDHPs, more and more of us are using voluntary benefits as a strategic component to a plan versus letting somebody else come into the client and sell a bunch of products that nobody knows anything about, right? So what we've been able to get out of our carrier partners over the last few years is simplicity, right? We've taken a menu of supplemental health benefits that if you look at somebody's bill from 2010, they could have 50 different dollar amounts for one class of benefit. And now as we move into this group space, a lot of the carriers have come in and said, we don't like that. We're going to simplify it. We're going to make the plans super rich. We're going to make them super affordable. And we're going to make them really easy for you, Mr. and Mrs. Client, to administer these on your enrollment systems, communicate them to your employees, and really do a good job at helping employees understand how these benefits help them as it relates to their medical plans.
Okay. All right. Well, how about, we talked about, I think the issues with 60% of, Americans not having $1,000 in their savings, I don't think that's new with COVID. That was an existing, it's been an existing problem. It's just as same as, employees not putting enough away for their retirement and those kinds of things. But what do you think the impact of COVID has been on the voluntary benefits space in particular?
Well, I think it's forced a lot of people who ordinarily would never have thought of this benefit class. It's forced them to take another look. You had, yes, there are a lot of people last year that were impacted by COVID that had pre-existing conditions, but you also had a lot of people that were impacted by COVID that were super healthy, right? Never really had to access healthcare before. And so what you saw, or what we've seen, is that employees are taking a much closer look at what their medical plans are, what they have, what they don't have. And then also now taking a look at some of these other supplemental plans that maybe didn't make sense to them a year ago, but certainly make a lot of sense to them now. They saw their brothers, their sisters, their mothers, their fathers be hospitalized, get sick, and everybody thought they had incredible health insurance, only to find out that as good as their health insurance was, there were still pieces to it that were just simply unaffordable. And so what we're seeing now is, again, just another look at how these voluntary benefits of 2021 really can be helpful and meaningful, and that it's not the same voluntary benefits that people were selling back in 2005. It really has come a long way.
Right. Yeah, and I think that I know, as kind of going along with what Daniel focused on, simple, I think to your point about, carriers out there are combining products, making one product out of two products or three, and trying to make that benefit certainly richer and more simplified. Like, I don't have to decide if I need these three or four. I can just decide perhaps I need this one. So I do think that that particular product or product line will continue to evolve and get simpler. And then, of course, the challenge is educating the employees on, this is where it fits. And so I know you and I talk a lot about where does the communication, or if you're on an enrollment system, for example, where do you place that benefit? Place it with your medical plan instead of at the bottom of your offering, so that it seems disconnected, when in essence, most of those benefits are supplemental health benefits. They go hand in hand with your medical plan. So some of it is just making it simpler to understand. But all right. Well, thanks so much, Kim. And so with that, we're gonna move along to Mark Ryder. And as I mentioned, Mark is our head of innovation, and he keeps all of our heads spinning around NFP on all things digital, which is on most days wonderful, and some days it gets a little like a little bit of a whirlwind. But at NFP, we certainly consider ourselves innovative. We want to be innovative for our clients. We certainly are agnostic in how we approach things. But with all the challenges of the past year, we need to, we're very focused on the opportunities that, all that's happened has highlighted for organizations to invest in solutions that support their employees, reduce cost, do all those things that you need to do, attract and retain talent. And so, Mark, in the report, in the trend report for 2021, you reference the trends such as data, technology advancements, APIs, personalization. Can you help unpack those for the audience and turn those into some key points that they can put into practice?
Yeah, for sure. We talk about COVID, you mentioned, and COVID being an accelerator for a lot of change, whether it's the way we work or the benefits that we're providing or the focus on well-being. But I would say the trends, and we might even talk to them as drivers that started the process of change that has thus been accelerated with COVID, really focus. There's a few of them that I think combined focus in on a user experience, bettering a user experience. And Daniel put on a little bit, he's talking about autonomy, and that's an employee experience, but it's all about improving the way in which somebody's using an application, the job that they're doing, whatever it might be. And when we talk about that, we really point to 4 different categories of drivers, and they all somewhat play off of one another. The first, and I'll walk through them, is data. You hear the phrase data is king, and it is. I mean, the more data you have, whether it be shopping for benefits, whether it be dealing with employees, whether it be positioning a new product, the more data you have, the more you know about what and where you should position those products and the experience you're looking to try to create. And we're sitting on data today that's greater than it's ever been. If you think, I think it was IBM that quoted, and you can probably find it in a million different places now, that said over the course of the last few years, there's been more data created than had been created since the beginning of time. And it's one of those mind-blowing stats that you kind of want to fact check and think about for a while. But when you do think about it, and it takes us into what we'll call our second driver, technology is allowed for that. We're on a hockey stick curve of technology advancements. And the more technology in play, the more data that's being produced, because the majority of those technology solutions could be best categorized into the Internet of Things. They're solutions that are always connected, and they're aggregating and grabbing data from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. So whether it's you're waking up and you're staring at your phone, you walk out of your room and you have the Fitbit on because it was tracking how you were sleeping. You jump into a car or a plane and go to work or the office, or at least we used to, and now we're doing that again. And then you go to bed again, and you're setting your alarm maybe for your break, like Daniel, or to go to bed at the end of the evening. And that is being gathered and tracked. Kurzweil, Dr. Raymond Kurzweil, who is a scientist, stated there's a law of accelerating returns. And he suggests that from a technology perspective, that in the 21st century, which is 100 years worth of time, that we won't experience 100 years worth of progress in technology. Rather, it'll be more equivalent to 20,000 years worth of progress that we had seen in the past, which is mind-blowing. And it's somewhat, I think, what fuels some of those conversations that we have, Kim, where some days it's good and some days it's too much, right? Because it can be overwhelming. So now we have the technology, we have the data, and data is great, but data by itself, not real useful. It has to be brought together to generate information, to be able to generate strategies. In fact, we don't do a very good job across the board of doing that. I think there's a statistic that somewhere like 14, or we've only really are able to analyze 12 to 15% of the data that exists out there. So there's huge opportunity. And the reason has been is that data bring together was really difficult, and it still is difficult, but it's getting better as a result of APIs. And APIs, and you don't have to have any technology background to know. All you have to do is have been a good shopper. You have been on Amazon and you typed in, I want a pair of sneakers, and Amazon does an API call. It reaches out to other computers, other systems that have inventory, and comes back and tells them in a split second who has shoes, how much they cost, what sizes are available. That's a great user experience. It was driven by data and API and technology, which then boils it down to our last piece, which is personalization. People expect their customers or their folks they're doing business with to know about them. They expect them to bring strategies pertinent to them. And that creates personalization, which ultimately drives back, full circle back to the beginning, a better user experience. So, that's what we point to, and we're excited. We just hope that the one good thing that came from COVID is that it accelerated the pace of people looking at those drivers. I don't think it's going to slow down now that we're starting to get back to the normal. At least I hope not, because it shouldn't take a pandemic to help us to get better.
All right. Well, I think, what resonates with me is Daniel Pink's comment about the why. So as you said, data by itself, data is great, but if you don't know the why of why you're looking at the data, what is the story of that data? I think it's easy to get overwhelmed with it. So, kind of pick and choose which data is the most relevant to you as a business, and hopefully, NFP is helping you solve for that in some way. So, well, if you had to point to one area, Mark, for a company to focus on that wanted to innovate or transform their business, what would it be?
It's an interesting question. You probably think with the title head of innovation, I'm going to come forward and tell you it's AI or machine learning, or blockchain is one that everybody always throws out there, because that's what people in my position do. They talk about these fancy words and think it elevates themselves. But I'm going to zig when some might zag, and I'm going to say it's education of your people. It's engagement and it's culture. I'll put them all into the same bucket, is in addressing the people that are going to help you change. Because the most difficult part about change and innovating, and that's what innovating is, it's changing for the better, is buy-in. It's adoption. And that's where most innovation across all corporations fail, is the fact that they don't get buy-in. And so when I look at that, it's important for employees to be on the same page. It's important for everybody to have an understanding of the why, and that there's buy-in, because without buy-in, it can stifle a lot of innovation. It's real easy for someone to throw a monkey wrench into things and trip it up. And a lot of progress that was being made gets stifled, which then breeds frustration. And sometimes that leaves people checking out. So Daniel mentioned it, and it kind of seems like we were coordinated, but we really weren't. Daniel mentioned the why. There needs to be a story behind why you're looking to innovate. I used to reference Simon Sinek and say that you had to have a why, because now I'm going to reference Daniel Pink. I'm going to say, well,
That's right.
Daniel Pink said that we need a why, but I think he's right. If there isn't an understanding of why we're looking to do what we're looking to do, then you have confusion. And so, if I had to step through it, explain what innovation is. Number one, really help everybody understand that it's about being better. Forget about the tools that are there to help you innovate. Technology will help innovation happen. You have to have the desire to want to be better in order to have innovation really take shape. Number one. Second, I think, as an organization, give your employees permission to fail, or should I say, encourage them to innovate. And you hear a lot of folks say, well, we don't discourage innovation. There's a difference between encouraging it and not discouraging it. So in encouraging people to think better, to step outside of what was the normal process that was built for them, and to have them offer up opinions, because most employees that are executing on tasks, they're the closest to it, and they're going to be your best sources of new ideas. They don't need to know what technology you're going to use to solve for it. They need to be the ones that come up with the problem. And I think the last piece is demystifying all the lingo, the language that's out there. I once spoke at a conference, and it was a bunch of people in my kind of role, and they were wondering what was stifling AI in most industries, and they all got up with their really sophisticated answers. And I tried to dummy it down and said, I think the word AI is stifling AI. I think machine learning scares the crap out of people, and they see and automatically transport themselves to these movies where computers are taking over the world, and nobody wants that, right? So to let people understand what these tools are actually doing, that AI and computers aren't replacing jobs. In fact, they're making jobs more valuable. They're taking you out of that bottom quadrant that Daniel was talking about and making it less boring, because those boring tasks, they can be done by a computer once you train them and people are required. So, and that comes back again, I'll take it back to the user experience. It creates a better user experience. And now there's a ton of things we could talk about as the next steps, but that'll be left for everybody to read the trend report, because we talked about some ideas.
All right.
Thank you, Kim. I'm thanking you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for speaking, and hopefully, folks will. I think some of the biggest confusion is that innovation means technology. It doesn't. I mean, it's not. It's different than that. So, thank you for those insights, sir. And we're going to move on to everyone's favorite. It's again a love-hate relationship with compliance. So Chase Cannon is joining us. So Chase, in 2020, and it feels like it's just keeping on in 2021, the continuous bombardment of federal and state legislative and regulatory rules has resulted in challenges, complexities, and really exhaustion for employers. You and the rest of the compliance team have done an extensive amount of work so far. I don't know how many webinars, and it just feels like for a while it was every week we were communicating on different things going on in the compliance world. So I mean, what do we do? I mean, in this new environment with, we've got remote workers, we've got hybrid models, we've got everything going on, and all of that, remote work became, the obvious norm. But, what are the continuing compliance issues as, as employers consider, am I leaving people at home? Am I bringing them back in this hybrid model? Am I requiring them all to come back? What are the continuing compliance issues to consider with these continued variances of remote work?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And first of all, thanks to everybody for making it on a compliance perspective through the last 15 months. It has been crazy. And so thank you for continuing to listen to our voice with that. We've done our best to try and track it, but it has not been easy. I know it hasn't been easy for us, but it has not definitely been easy for employers. It's just been a real challenge. When it comes to remote work, there are a few things, and we talk a little bit about this in the trend report. I wanted to focus on three really quickly here. The first is communication with your remote employees when it comes to plan-related notices. Overall, communication is an issue, right, when you have a remote workforce. But when you're talking about plan-related notices, how are you getting those notices? Think about SPDs, SBCs, Medicare Part D notices, COBRA notices. How do you get that to a remote workforce? Email is where everybody wants to be. That's fine if the employee has a work email address or if computer access is a big part of their job. But you know, the email, one thing it should say is that the employee does have a right to receive a paper copy and how to request that. That sometimes gets forgotten, that that's a right that an employee has and the employer needs to communicate. But for many positions, employees just might not have the appropriate level of email or computer access to satisfy the DOL rules. And so think about warehouse workers, landscapers, hotel, trucking or driving companies. You just don't have that email access. So paper notices might be a better option. Really quickly, COBRA notices, we're talking a lot about those with the ARPA COBRA subsidies and notices that have to go out for that. That's the most recent challenge for employers. COBRA notices are not good candidates for email distribution. And that's just because employees that are supposed to get COBRA notices are usually not at work, right? They've been terminated, they're on a leave of absence, they're furloughed. And so we're saying that paper notices are probably a better idea there. But just that idea of how do we communicate plan-related info, workplace posters, usually those are in the break room. Now they probably have to be sent via email or communicated somehow. But probably the biggest issue is state tax nexus, right? You have employees working in different states. Potentially, you used to go into the office in New York as an employee. Someone now might be working from their home in Connecticut or New Jersey. That comes with a bevy of issues. Tax withholding is the biggest one, and that in turn drives state benefit and leave protections. And so that's a tax issue that probably is a little bit out, you know, need to talk to outside counsel. It has impact on other areas, but for benefits purposes, it's really an important one to get straight. Because it leads to withholding for state benefit and leave protection contributions that employees have to make. And then it also leads to those protections for those employees. If you have an employee in Massachusetts working remotely, they may now be entitled to Massachusetts paid family and medical leave law, whereas before they may have been subject to New York's or some other states. And so just that shift. So yeah, it's a huge challenge. Those are two of the things to really focus on with remote workers though.
Okay, well, and in some industries and locations throughout the country, I mean, as employees return to work on a more regular basis, what should employers be thinking about with respect to vaccinations? I know the EEOC has just come out with, you know, some new guidelines on mandating vaccines, and, you know, so I guess from both a mandatory and an incentive-based side of things, any advice there?
Yeah, so those are really the two big questions. Can we require it and can we incentivize around it? On requiring vaccinations, our position has long been, and EEOC has kind of confirmed this, that it's possible you can do it, but we're not recommending it. And the reason is because it's just lots of hoops you have to jump through in doing that. Particularly, you have to consider those with disabilities and those with religious or other objections. So think of someone with an allergy to vaccines. Think of somebody with a sincerely held religious belief. And then there's also, you know, like pregnancy could be a condition where it's a legitimate objection to a vaccination. And so the employer has to consider those. They have to figure out a way, if there's a way to give that employee a workaround without getting vaccination, if you're going to require it. That's just what the ADA calls a reasonable accommodation, right? A reduced or staggered work schedule, remote work, a different work location, changes in the work environment, like an improved ventilation system, plastic shields between desks, or even requiring the employee to wear a mask. So really, it's just a challenge to jump through all those hoops. The employee has the right and actually the obligation to let the employer know about that disability or objection. And they don't have to say the words ADA or reasonable accommodation. So it's similar to FMLA in that they just have to raise the issue. but then the employer is sort of obligated to enter into this flexible interactive process to identify workplace accommodations. So it's a challenge there. And incentives, this is some new guidance from the EEOC. Incentives are okay, but the guidance says that it can't be overly coercive. So we get sick of this legalese type of language, and this really isn't all that helpful to say overly coercive, because, you know, a $50 incentive to one person may seem like a lot, whereas for others it not. Or if you go up to $300, is that going to be overly coercive? So it's just another ambiguous term, but I think the takeaway is that it should probably be a smaller reward if you're going to go with this, like a gift card or something similar. If you start tying it to the group health plan as a premium reduction, you're going to get issues with that. It's going to be a lot harder. The other thing to remember is there's different agencies here. We've just heard from the EEOC, but the Department of Labor also has HIPAA rules around incentives. And so if you start tying it to the group health plan, we still don't have a lot of guidance there. And then really quickly, the last thing to consider is confidentiality of employee information, right? If you're gathering medical info, usually that's going to be in a pre-vaccination questionnaire. You're going to be seeing sensitive information, personally identifiable medical information. Employers can ask for that, but you need to protect it. Treat it as sensitive information, separate it from the regular employee's personnel file, and just treat it as confidential. It's not usually a HIPAA problem, which is a question we get a lot, because it's not related to the group health plan, but it's still sensitive information that needs to be protected.
Okay, Chase. So we're gonna stop there, just because we've got a couple more folks who need to highlight. I know that we're waiting any day for the Supreme Court's ruling on ACA. So I'm sure that when that comes, our clients and teams will see some a Washington update from you and the compliance team. So thank you so much for joining us. And we're gonna move on to Dr. Mark Tomasulo, our medical director. Hi, Dr. Mark. Thank you for joining us. So, keeping up with this ever-changing healthcare delivery system is a challenge, and I think, as Mark Ryder indicated, it feels like everything since 2020 has been accelerated, right? It feels like so many things are on a fast track. And a one-size-fits-all, kind of mentality that we've already talked about is in the rear view mirror. But everything virtual care is, moving at a pretty fast pace here. So, do you see it? What's the trend you see? I mean, I think everybody sees, increased usage, but now that we're kind of back to, we can go to the doctor, those kinds of things, what are the trends you see in telemedicine over the next, few years? And what are any limitations you see to its use?
Yeah, I think what COVID did was it forced people to get comfortable with technology in areas that might have been very personal in the past. And so doctor-patient relationship is one of those categories that's very personalized. And so the use of telemedicine has been around for a very long time, but I think it was forced upon a lot of people to manage chronic diseases and acute issues, and then started expanding kind of the offerings of what you can do inside of telemedicine. And so it created an environment where doctors had to get more comfortable with their capabilities and what they can manage, and it allowed patients to get a little bit more comfortable. And so I think what we've discovered through this process of being forced into a position by a pandemic is that it was actually adopted pretty well. And more importantly, it created a conduit for disassociated workspaces, right? So geography really wasn't the prohibiting factor for getting healthcare any longer, right? Going into an office wasn't the prohibiting factor for you to go get seen by your provider. So I think that the future of telemedicine is probably at its infantile stages, and we're learning a lot of things on how to use it, what's the best use of telemedicine, and more importantly, really understanding that it's a value add to the current system. It's not the solution moving forward for 100% of what you're going to do, but what it does, it allows you to expand access to care, change how wellness is treated, change how patients can access their physicians, and let their physicians have a little bit more of an integrated relationship with them long term. So I see the trend of telemedicine really taking off in the future, but I think that we're going to learn more and more throughout time. What are we really capable of managing through telemedicine? Because patients and physicians still need to have physical interactions. You know, doctors have to listen to things or touch things and in order to really make their diagnosis. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years, but it will definitely expand.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. I think there's going to be a bit of a turn back to those who I really like seeing my doctor face to face. There were certainly folks like that who were, forced into a situation where I'm only going to see my doctor on my video screen, but were very anxious to get back into the office when that happens. So, but I agree with you. Virtual care is going to, we've seen it in musculoskeletal. We certainly have seen it in behavioral health. That's been around for a while, but accelerated. So it's just going to continue. Well, in a quick minute or so, I mean, any other healthcare, what else do you see in the healthcare as an industry changing in terms of care and cost? I mean, any kind of bullet points you can give us there?
I think value and cost are going to be hand in hand at the end of the day, and increased cost does not equate to increased value. It's typically an inverse relationship. So I see the healthcare community being forced into a competitive position, especially with the transparency that's coming out with pricing. That you can no longer just charge what you want. You have to be competitive in the space, which is only half of the game. You also have to show value for what you're charging. So the quality of your work has to be in conjunction with the cost. And I think you're going to see more of a free market inside of the healthcare space in the next couple of years moving forward. And that's where I think, the voluntary benefits and all of these other topics that we're touching on is really going to impact the healthcare space and how you plan design moving forward.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to jump in. I know we're going to run a few minutes over here. So apologies to those on the call and apologies to Nellie, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the pharmacy side. So pharmacy has had, been in the spotlight simply from a pure cost standpoint, the amount of healthcare costs that it has, eats up these days for employers. And I know in the trend report, Nellie, you touch on a lot of things around the pharmacy space, but for today, I know we want to focus on the outpatient prescription costs. They've been a major focus in healthcare spend, and that's causing a lot of concerns. What do you think is driving that shift in the spend?
Thank you, Kim. Well, for the first time ever, more than half of pharmacy spend is attributed to specialty drugs. For those of you that are not familiar with what those treat, specialty drugs treat complex conditions that require special handling, administration, and tight clinical oversight. Some therapeutic classes include inflammatory conditions, multiple sclerosis, HIV, and oncology. So although these drugs treat or impact less than 2% of our population, they account for nearly 51% of the spend under the pharmacy benefit. So 2% drives 51% of cost. We do anticipate that this specialty trend will continue to increase about 10 to 15% over the next few years. And it's mainly driven by medications for inflammatory conditions, new cancer treatments, and novel therapies for rare conditions. There's been a high focus in new and novel treatment for small populations of unique and rare conditions that have never been addressed in the past. I think, the biggest shocker and trend is that oncology has actually seen the largest relative rise in medicine use the last decade by over 14% growth rate year over year, and that's on a global scale. And then we do anticipate a little bit of financial reprieve. We do anticipate that there will be some downward trend in cost for HIV therapy as more generics become available in the market.
Okay. Okay, well, and it does seem like in 2020, we saw decreases in, cost for all the wrong reasons, in the healthcare space in general, people not getting treated when they needed to be treated and, surgeries not occurring, all those things. In a quick answer, Nellie, I mean, do you see any definite, like, these are impacts from COVID on pharmacy, and will they continue, or are we coming out of that?
We are definitely coming out of that. I will say that we did see a little bit of a decrease in 2020 on drug volume. We saw about a 3% decrease, mainly driven by new to brand prescribing because of the missed in-person visits. Essentially dropped the new brand prescriptions by almost 11% of a decline. But we have seen and already seeing a large improvement in that trend in most recent months.
Okay. All right. Well, I think, we're over a couple of minutes, but I do want to wrap relatively on time. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us today, and thank all of our contributors for their time and their sharing of strategies and discussions. And for taking time away from your busy day. Everyone will receive a copy of the full trend report, as we've talked about. I encourage you again to review the report in its entirety. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to your NFP office. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.